Stories inspire us. They teach us, they entertain us, and they comfort us. From the beginning of time, children have sat on their parents' laps and they've listened to tales of wonder. It is stories where we first encounter the evils in the world and where we learn that actions have consequences and that endings can be happy or sad, and that sometimes it's hard to tell which. As we grow, so too do our stories. They change according to our interests. A young boy might become intrigued by famous battles, a young girl by magicians and magic. But whether we realize it or not, they will continue to accompany us throughout the journeys of our lives. Business, of course, is no different. We are drawn to rags and riches accounts of success. We are intrigued by those who might have struggled, but who have overcome unimaginable difficulties in order to achieve success. We can't but listen to the warning signs of those who have traveled the road before us and maybe who have taken the wrong turn. We engage through the experience of others and we gain insight into our own lives through theirs. It is how we've always learned. Some weeks ago, Synthesis launched a series called Born in Adversity, where we showcased inspiring stories and inspiring lives of others. Vusi Thembekwayo captivated attendees who were entranced by his journey. The feedback was so tremendous that we decided to launch Born in Adversity 2, featuring businesswoman Amanda Dambuza, business media personality Nastassia Arendse, Synthesis co-founder Jake Shepherd. This webinar will take a look at the many faces of a successful business, and we hope to do so through stories and contemplation. Once upon a time in a land far away is how they all begin. The question is how it ends. I'm Howard Feldman, and this is the Synthesis AWS Born in Adversity webinar. Good afternoon and welcome. We have an incredible panel today. It's a small panel, and I'm particularly excited about that. What I'm going to do is tell you about each of our panelists, and I'm going to ask Jared to bring them on to the screen. We're going to talk about, I'm going to introduce them, and then we're going to allow each person to present their story. Amanda Dambuza will have more time, I think, than the rest of us. She's going to take us through her journey. After that, we'll hear from Nastassia, then from Jake, and then everybody will come back for a panel. Please ask your questions. There is space to be able to do so. Please go ahead and do that, and also participate in some of the polls and the questions that we are going to present to you. Amanda Dambuza is an entrepreneur with a business interest in information technology and leadership. She's a 2017 overall winner of a very prestigious International Businesswomen's Award, having already won the entrepreneurial category. And she has been honored as an inspiring businesswoman who is involved with empowering, support, and encouraging female creativity and leadership. Nastassia has been in broadcasting for 10 years and has worked in both television and radio. She's covered global commodity markets for MoneyWeb, focusing on how prospects for the global economy, interest rates, currencies influence investor decisions in relation to gold, precious metal, fixed income, and equities. She represents a new breed of journalists that have managed to break the mold of the profession. Jake Shepherd is a founder of Synthesis. And as you know, Synthesis was acquired by Capital Appreciation Limited, a JSE-listed fintech company, and remains one of their independent operating entities. Jake, around the office, is known as the human Wikipedia, and he's often called on for insights, clarity, and guidance at Synthesis and beyond. He's written numerous articles. He talks weekly on the radio station Chai FM and shares his knowledge. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Amanda, if we can head straight to you, I am greatly looking forward to hearing your journey.
Thank you so much for having me, Howard. Twice in 1 week, that's quite a treat. Thank you. So I was born in Natal, and I grew up in the Transkei, but I I grew up without my parents. I'm that child who was meant to be a boy, or let's just say they were really praying that I'd be a boy. And save their union, and as God would have it, no, I wasn't. I was the girl that my father wasn't interested in, and my mom and my dad then went their separate ways, and we grew up in her extended family in the Transkei. It was a really difficult upbringing. It was rife with obviously abandonment and that sense of rejection. Because my mom then left me when I was just a baby, and shortly after they separated, and she came to Joburg to find work, you know, and that's the story of you know, migrant laborers from what was the TPVC states at the time under the apartheid system. And my mom was only 27 years old when she gave birth to me, and I'm the third of three children. I'm the last of three children, and you know, I guess she just wanted a better life for herself, and she had planned to come back, but as life would have it, she didn't come back. I was introduced to her when I was about 6 to 7 years old, but even after that, she then, you know, went back to Joburg and carried on with her life, and I didn't see her much for years. Sometimes she'd just pop in, drop off stuff, and leave. So there was never really that parent connection and that motherly love between her and I. And in fact, I've never met my father. I haven't, even still today. So you know, at the back of that and the abuse that I suffered in that extended home, where extended family where I grew up, it was incredibly difficult because there was no encouragement, there was no nurture, there was no protection. It was, you know, physical abuse, sexual abuse. It was all of this just mental breakdown, and constantly being reminded that your parents don't want you, and that, you know, you are not going to amount to much. But you know, through all of that and going through that traumatic childhood in my formative years, I soon had to learn to just rely on my own strength and build up some mental muscle and say, you know, I am going through this, but someday I'll be older. Someday I'll be responsible for my own life, and that, you know, it won't last forever. But I had to go through it first before I could get on the other side. And you know, when I was 13 years old, we ran away and came to Joburg to find our mother. And she was living in a shack in Shengueville, and we rocked up at a doorstep at 4 in the morning. I still remember the day like it was yesterday, because inside my heart, it was filled with so much hope and so much promise that, you know, I would finally be with my mother, and that we could finally be a family. But it wasn't really going to be that easy. It didn't turn out to be the best reunion, let me put it that way. I mean, it wasn't a couple of weeks after that, my mom sent me off to Lesotho, hoping that, you know, I'll get into Lesotho High, but a decision that I never understood. I was 13 years old. I had just found her, and you know, it is, you know, her shipping me off to Lesotho didn't make sense to me. And again, that abandonment came back. You know, that sense of she never wanted you, she doesn't want you, came back. And you know, I wasn't accepted in the school that she sent me to because, you know, I didn't speak the language. I didn't speak Sesotho, and that was the requirement. And I mean, I was sent off. It's not like anyone took me there and orientated me or anything like that. So I've always just had this hardship in my childhood, and understanding though that I had to dig deep. You know, I had to just keep going and keep fighting. So even when I was in the deep mountains in Maseru, dark mountains, staying in a little hut with an old lady who was blind, she was actually the friend to my mom's mother who took me in when the school didn't accept me. And that's all I did, you know, is just sit there and look after her and learn to read and write Sesotho. So my childhood background was really one that was not, it didn't have much promise in it. But I had to dig deep from an early age. I had to learn to be resilient. I may not have had the right words, but I knew that I had to walk through that storm before I get on the other side. So you know, and from there, I came back to Joburg. My mom fetched me. And continued. I mean, I've lived in shacks, Mshenguville, Orange Farm. I've lived in shacks whilst we were waiting for her house to be built. And you know, the one thing that was never any doubt for me was my education. And you know, I always just buried my books and my studies. Even back in the Transkei, it was my escape. So when I came back to Joburg, and I did very well in high school, but even then I faced another hurdle. They sent me back a year because, you know, I was too young to be in standard 8, you know, something that in the Transkei never mattered. You started school at 4 when you were 4 and you just continued, you know. So, but you know, all those things were just hurdles. And when I eventually graduated from high school and went to Wits, it was just another platform that I needed to jump over, or a hurdle I needed to jump over. I was very hopeful. For me, being at Wits was about really starting to live my life as that adult that I always pictured when I was back in the Transkei. But I knew that I just needed that ticket, that education, so that I could be invited to those tables. I didn't come from a family or well-known family. I didn't come from riches. I didn't have anyone to speak for me. So I was always going to be the plan that had to work. And going to Wits was really to give me that boost and give me that ticket to the game. But it wasn't going to be easy there either, because I was financially excluded from about around June in my first year, because the fees hadn't been paid. But I mean, just even getting through, just getting registered into Wits was quite a struggle. I had to really beg the registration lady to just listen to my story, because I actually didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to do it. I was completely lost in that entire Witsy world. And it was also quite alienating for me in a way to have that initial experience, because I was there alone, again, trying to navigate this world. And there were families, you know, there was just so much happiness around. There was just a sense of achievement. And I think that alone also just gave me the sense of, you know, I still don't have a sense of belonging. I don't understand that. I don't know what love is. I don't know what encouragement is. I don't know any of that. So you know, it was a struggle. But because I just kept my head down, I worked. I held more than 3 jobs at any given time whilst I was studying. I stood at corners of traffic lights dishing out pamphlets. I stood, you know, in supermarkets till 2 o'clock in the morning doing stock taking, and I've also, you know, just knew it, just that my work ethic is the only thing that was ever going to get me through and get me to reach the levels of success that I needed. And you know, even when I graduated from Wits, eventually, I mean, I got a bursary from TEFSA at the time, what NSFAS now. Obviously, I had to pay back 40% of that. 40% was converted to a bursary if you passed all your subjects, and then 20% you had to work for. So I was constantly working, and you know, but I knew that's what I needed to do to just keep going and to realize my vision that I had when I was growing up in the Transkei, being told all sorts of negative scripts about, you know, my worth and why I'm even here, and, you know, why do I even bother trying? I just had to prove to myself that I was worth way more than what I was told, and that, in fact, I had to define who I wanted to become. So it's been quite a ride, and eventually I graduated and started working, and I'm that person. I treat every opportunity like it's never going to come again, because I've never had plan B. If things that I touch don't work, it's all on me. I've never had, you know, I'll call my mom if I'm stuck, or if I can't pay rent, I'll call somebody. I've never had that. I've never had to rely on anybody else but myself. So, you know, I I worked hard throughout all my opportunities. I really just touched them with gratitude and with a sense of excellence. I strived to leave an impact, a mark, because I knew if I did that, then I would be needed in some way. And it's the same ethic I applied when I was back in the Transkei. I always did all of the crappy jobs nobody wanted to do. I fed pigs before I went to school. I looked after chickens. I was just that person who was just running around in the fields, weeding vegetables or anything that nobody wanted to do. And because those children had their parents, every parent protects their children, right? There's thunder and lightning, don't go outside and fetch mealies, but I would be the one doing it, So yeah, that's really been my journey, and worked my way up right to in corporate. I was in corporate for about 13 years, but always had side hustles. So I've always been in business as well. My first business, I was 23 years old. It was actually about a year or two after I graduated. I started selling flowers to corporates. I started selling, shoes and handbags out of my boot. I just always knew that I must keep hustling. I must keep fighting hard to have the life that I've wanted, because adversity is all I had known. It's all I had been told. Essentially, from birth, you're born not wanted. So your sense of worth is just shot at every moment. But I had to build that up, and I invested in myself. I saw a lot of psychologists. I saw priests. You name it, I did it, just to make sure that I was starting to redefine who I wanted to become and work towards that. And the success I reached in corporate was just incredible. It was amazing. My last role, I was a CIO, Chief Information Officer at a bank. And then I decided it was time to get into entrepreneurship full-time, as I needed that flexibility with my children. And I remember very well what triggered that. One day, I was at a CIO summit and I finished early, and I thought, let me surprise the kids at school and fetch them early. The twins were quite young, and they had just started grade 1. In fact, they were 7. And I rocked up and my husband was there, and I said to him, oh, I was surprising the girls. Why are you here? He said to me, well, it's the girls' ballet concert. And I said, well, why didn't anybody tell me that there was a concert? And the little girls, my children, looked at me and they said, but Mama, you never come anyway. And that literally cut through me like a knife. And I felt that, I was there, but I was not there. And honestly, I was no different from my own parents. So I had to make some lifestyle changes. And hence we're now here. And I haven't looked back since. And that was over 6 years ago, in fact, almost 7 years ago.
Absolutely incredible. I mean, the circle, the circle that you speak about, that you landed up almost emulating the part of your own childhood. Obviously, not to the same extent, to the same abandonment, but you actually emotionally had removed yourself as well, and that you had to come full circle is just an incredible thing. One of the lines that just keep jumping out for me is that you never had Plan B. There was no support. There was no one ever in your world growing up to rely on or to turn to if things went wrong. That must have been, and must continue still to be, an enormous sense of pain for you.
Yeah, of course. The pain never goes away. You just learn how to not let it control you, and you just learn how it shows up, in everything you do. Because unfortunately, we all have that little child in all of us, and if there's stuff that you were starved of when you were younger, they'll continuously want it. So it's a lot of self-awareness that has to go into it, and understand what it is that you need to give to yourself, to give to that little child. The pain will never go away. I mean, I was getting beaten up every single day for nothing. I constantly was just blue, green, and purple. I couldn't walk properly most of the time. Even my eye took a while to recover, because my one uncle used to really beat me up a lot for no reason, well, whatever. And he was an alcoholic, so you knew that was just a way of life for us. and you know, and then the sexual abuse, and then the constant mental belittling, and you know, just breaking you down. So that those things don't just go away, you know, you just learn to rise above them. You learn and you work on yourself to make sure that they don't control you, because then you really would have amounted to nothing if you let them take away the life that you rightfully deserve.
Well, you were told you weren't wanted. You were treated as though you were nothing. What's fascinating is that there was a part of you that always knew that you weren't nothing, and that you were better than this, and that life could offer you something better, that there was always this. And as you said, you didn't have the words for it, but you knew you had to get through the storm and become a master of your own destiny to some extent. But that's quite unusual. I would imagine that many people in that position would not have been able to see beyond those circumstances.
And a lot of people still don't, right, Howard? There's a lot of people who carry that pain with them, and who don't see. I mean, there's a reason why a lot of people who have suffered a similar childhood do tend to kill themselves, or are constantly depressed, or you know, because when you have no reason to live, you know, there were times when I asked if my own life was worth living, and the answer that I always came back with was that it is, you know, and I think I just never lost that sense of hope. You know, when it's deep and it's dark and you have nothing else left, you find something to hang on to. So that was hope and just my faith and my spirituality, where I started to think, surely God, then I shouldn't have been born if I would amount to nothing. You know, so but again, there was no eloquence to it. It was just this feeling I had inside of me, and just to hang on to something. And we can't lose hope, you know, because the moment we lose hope, then there's nothing to live for.
And I guess all the work that you did, as you said, between priests and psychologists and all of that, was actually just the way of verbalizing that, of giving words to what you had endured so that you could frame it and contain it.
Yeah, absolutely. And also reconcile my own understanding and my own internal belief of who I thought I was and what I would become. I reconcile that against what I was told by adults. And remember, it was in my formative years. So it was trying to break down what I had been told and reconcile with what I believe I can be. And just get the necessary, you know, affirmation, if I can call it that truly God does love me, and why would I be any different from others? So it really was about digging deep and just keep going.
Before we hand over to Nastassia, and we are going to come back for questions, but there is one question that is particularly about your story from one of our viewers, Karen. She wants to know, does your mom know how successful you became in your life, and what is that relationship like today? I know I asked you that exact question on my show as well, but obviously a question that people just, they need to know the end of that story.
Yes, no, my mom knows. My mom is in my life. She is my children's grandkid. Yeah, my kids' grandmother. English, Howard. Yeah, she is their grandmother. And listen, that relationship is complicated. She is in my life. I look after her. She'll never go to bed hungry. And you know, because again, I said to you, the reasons why something happened doesn't take away the pain. So the reason could have been, I didn't have a job, I had to go find work. But it doesn't take away the fact that you made a decision and left and opened me up for all of this. So the consequences of the decision that you made. And unfortunately, you know, with parents, you kind of have to walk the journey and start to understand. But then why should I understand, you know, some of the things and try and justify them? And that's the difficulty with things like this. You also don't want to hurt your mom or say nice, ugly words. She knows how successful I am. She's seen it, but people also tell her, She sees it on TV, but I never pick up a phone and say, "Oh, Mom, you won't believe what happened," because I don't have a relationship with her. I don't have that kind of relationship, that is. So it is painful. It's a reminder every day. I mean, but you can never take it away. This was my reality, so I had to deal with it and do the best I could.
Unbelievable story, and it just so incredibly moving and inspiring. I think this is a story that everybody needs to hear. Amanda, we'll come back to you in the panel discussion in just in a short while. So that is a personal journey, and it is very difficult. It's all about resilience. It's all about seeing the bigger picture. What I'm fascinated about as well is, do we see that type of resilience manifesting in a business environment? And I've asked Nastassia Arendse, who's a media personality, a financial journalist, to take a look at it from her own perspective and through her own stories, and have a look at some of the businesses that she's encountered along her way to determine this, to see if there is a thread here.
No, totally. Howard, thank you so much for, inviting me onto the platform. There is definitely a common thread when I look at all the, entrepreneurs, CEOs that I've spoken to over the past decade or so. One that comes to mind, as, with discussing, is a guy by the name of Frank Makwekwe, who I'd met, I think, 4 years ago when I still worked at MoneyWeb. And his story is quite fascinating because at the time when I met him, he was, an executive at Momentum Investments. And someone had said to me, well, have you ever heard of Frank's story? And I said, no. I mean, when I interview him, we just have a, normal conversation about finance and investments and, that kind of stuff. But we never, delve deeper to have that connection where you want to ask a little bit more about the other person. And I suppose that comes back to, the media side. We were so engrossed in getting the story and then moving on to the next bit. But when I did eventually have a conversation with him, he, mentioned to me that he's from the Eastern Cape. And the only reason he ended up in Johannesburg was at the time when he was in the Eastern Cape, he had lost his job because he was basically caught, not drinking on the job, but he helped himself to some of the refreshments and he subsequently was fired. However, he decided that he wants to move to Johannesburg and basically stayed with some friends and a relative. And that didn't last very long because ultimately he was kicked out because he didn't have an income. He just basically arrived in Johannesburg trying to find opportunity. But when you're thrown in that, you end up homeless, which was the case for him, where he was sleeping in downtown Johannesburg, in any place he could find where he could find shelter. And what was interesting at the time is that he kept moving from one place to the other and the police would kick him out or, he'd risk being arrested. But what happened was that he subsequently made friends with somebody who was a hawker at the time selling fruits and vegetables. And she noticed him and basically said, well, look, if you can help me pack up my stuff, I will give you some leftover fruit and vegetables that people don't buy. And eventually, as we start building a trust relationship, I can pay you a little bit of money if you continue to help me and you're interested. And this is somebody who took on the opportunity because for him, it was a case of, well, there's not really much for me to do in the streets anyway, and I could go left and, get involved in all kinds of sinister activities, or I could take this opportunity and see what happens. And it just so happened that he started making enough money, saving it up all, and then set up his own store where he was also now selling fruits and vegetables. And before you know it, he had a second stall and a third stall that he started bringing the other guys who were also homeless to come and help him. What other people didn't know is that while he would wake up early in the morning to go do stock taking, to go to the fruit and vegetable market early morning to get the fruit so he can sell it, in between that time, he was going to the Johannesburg Public Library and he was basically reading any book he could get his hands on. And eventually a lady by the name of Mrs. Zimmerman found him, but she was quite curious and interested in this guy's pattern of movement. Like he comes in every day, he sits here for at least half the day and he's reading all the books, and she was trying to understand what was exactly going on here because it was very interesting. And they got to talking and she advised him to apply for a bursary at Wits University to study actuarial science, a BSc in actuarial science. And it just so happened that, you know, he got accepted, he got the bursary, and he studied and he qualified as an actuarial science graduate. Subsequent to get, has a master's from the University of Pretoria, worked at Momentum at the time when I had met him, and then started his own business to basically help people when it comes to, you know, financial investments, etc. But as he's telling me the story, all I got was the theme of resilience, of grit, to be able to wake up every morning when you're sleeping in less than ideal conditions every single day and you don't know where your next meal is going to come from, and to be able to clean yourself up, look presentable every day, and go to this job where you're selling fruits and vegetables to just make ends meet. Yes, you're passing the time to, you know, go to the library and read a bit, but you don't know what's going to happen around the corner. And it was that encounter, I think, with Mrs. Zimmerman, who gave him that advice that ultimately helped him make the decision that changed his life. And you need people like that along the way. And here's one story that stands out. There are many other stories of, you know, entrepreneurs and CEOs who went against the odds to set up something that people could never have imagined back in the 1990s as we were transitioning into democracy, or even during the state capture years, or the lost years as they've been described on financial media. So that is pretty much the stories that I find fascinating. There's so much to learn from everybody's journey, as you mentioned in your intro, and so much for us to pick up about the way they see the world, because I honestly believe we have these weird biases about whether we think the world is far better off than it was, call it 20, 25 years ago versus now. And these individuals who are caught up in all kinds of adversity, environments, give us a reason to believe that the world is not that bad. And you've got to take your cognitive, your biases, and change the way you view things, because basically how you see the world is how it manifests around you. And you got to change your belief system. So those are some of the stories that have inspired me over the years.
Thanks, Nastassia. So interesting. Do you think that translates to a corporate culture of resilience?
Totally. I mean, when you look at a company like Bidvest, for instance, I recently learned about a year ago that they have a little motto at every one of their facilities that says, Bidvest does not participate in a recession. And I thought, that is absolutely very interesting. It is, right?
Yeah, and can't have that. You're not interested in this whole recession business. Yeah,
exactly. And it speaks to the mindset, because if you're coming into an institution like Bidvest and you see that every day, despite what's happening around you and the noise, the company and every aspect of management, down to the guys who drive the vans, who do, what looks small, are all purpose driven, because they understand what the end goal is, and they understand that while you are too busy debating whether you're an optimist or a pragmatic person, the person who's an opportunist is not looking at whether the glass is half empty or half full. He's drinking the glass.
Absolutely.
And that says a lot about what Bidvest and many other companies are doing out there.
Absolutely incredible. So we'll come back to you as well. Jake Shepherd is the founder, is one of the founders of Synthesis. He's a director. He has done an immense amount of work on corporate culture, on understanding how we reframe our environment. Jake, your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Howard. I think we can all agree that in the current pandemic that we're going through, a successful business is actually a resilient business. And I think my central message that I want to give you today is that resilience is actually much more about engaging the human spirit than it is about almost any other aspect of a business. And specifically, the culture of the business is that thing that engages people. To say that the last 5 months have been difficult, I think is an understatement. I think we've gone through a bit of a time warp where the last 5 years has been condensed, and all the challenges and everything that we've had to face in a normal 5-year period has been condensed into like a 5-month period. And I think really from Synthesis's point of view, we've actually done fairly well. We've weathered the storm fairly well. And I think it's because of how we went into the pandemic. We had a lot of things right. So I think the first thing we have right is we've got a great culture which allows us to adapt to challenges. And I want to unpack that through this talk. But we also happen to work in the IT space, which actually makes things a lot easier in terms of being able to work remotely and deal with that. And then also with the work that we do with AWS, it means that we, in cloud services, it means that when we're actually working with clients, we're involved in a lot of strategic projects. And also new clients are coming to us because they can see that the cloud and AWS in particular can actually save them quite a lot of money at a time like this when you need to start worrying about cost savings. But I think there were still tremendous challenges. I mean, some of the challenges we were faced with were transitioning. We had to transition our company from a company that always had people working in the offices or working at clients. And all of a sudden, within like a 2-week period, everybody had to be working at home remotely. We have a scenario where marketing, which used to be like physical events, all of a sudden is all about online. And sales has come under tremendous pressure as well, because clients understandably need to worry about costs. And so they're trying to contract, and they're trying to do cost saving things as well. So what I really want to focus on though today is what makes a resilient culture. And I think I once heard that if all the people in a company are musicians, then culture is the symphony that results when everyone works together to create that music. And I really like this metaphor. I think it explains culture fairly well. Or at least in a metaphoric way. And then a resilient culture on top of that means that you can continue making music despite whatever challenges come your way. And I would even want to maybe suggest that if a business has a resilient culture, then it can compose a masterpiece in difficult times as well. So, I've always been told that Synthesis has a great culture. I've been told by staff, and I've been told by clients, this quite often. But I don't think it's good enough just to feel that you've got a good culture. I think that you need to actually articulate what it is that makes your culture great and what it is that makes it special. Because if you don't do that, then your culture ultimately is just a happy accident rather than something that is consciously built and consciously chosen. And unless you can step back and actually look at your culture, unless you can actually get a picture of what's working and what to preserve and what you need to change in order to remove some bottlenecks, you're not really focusing on your culture. So I think the first thing to understand, and I think it's come out really well in Amanda and Nastassia's talks, is the first thing to understand is why do people work in the first place? And in the words of the social scientist Elliot Jacks, everybody needs to work, not just any work, and not only for money, but work that is of value to others. So you really need to tap into creating work that is of value to others. And if you contrast this with the common stereotype of why people work, in other companies, they think that the employees are only working for a salary. They're trying to avoid the responsibilities if they can, and therefore they need to be supervised at every point in time. And my perspective is those companies that have this model of understanding about the employees, that leads to a culture that is characterized by micromanagement and a lack of trust. And so the question then is, how do we set things up so that we create this environment that's really effective? And I think at the basis of it is that we need to create a network of trust amongst our employees. And then we need to make people feel 4 things. They need to feel valued. They need to feel that that they're connected. They need to feel that they make a difference, and then they need to feel that they're growing. And in terms of being valued, maybe you need to really watch people for that point in time when they're doing something right, and then you can turn around and praise them for that. And then, when I'm hiring people, one of the things that I do is I always look for people that are better than me in some way. And I think you can adopt this even outside of an interview. You can look around the people that you're working with and work out what it is that they are better than you are. Because if you do that, you're naturally just going to value those people a lot more. And then also recognize, that the people have a life outside of work. And then when things are difficult and there's a crisis, you need to be flexible. You need to give them a bit of space to actually address that. Recognize the whole person and not just the worker. And then in terms of feeling connected, this COVID-19 crisis has taught us that there's no such thing as over-communicating. Now, traditionally, you always connect via the, over the office cooler, and you have these chats at the office, in the office space. We don't have that anymore. So you have to be a lot more explicit in communicating and reaching out and speaking to people. And then you need to make people feel that they're making a contribution. And the way that you can do this is you can articulate the why of the organization, why it is that you do what you do. And the reason is if you do that, you can move forward with purpose and with authenticity. But not only does that create alignment across your company, it also means that everybody in the company knows where they fit into the bigger picture. And then you also need to create an environment where people experience growth. You need to make it okay to fail. When people can fail, they can learn and they can bounce back. One of my colleagues told me about 8 years that she spent in a previous company, where it was 8 years of fear, because every time she would make a mistake, she was scared she was going to get shouted at and screamed at. And, I asked her if at Synthesis she had ever encountered anything like that. And she said, no, not ever, not even once, even when she has messed up. So really, I think resilient culture, you also need to recognize the fact that it's not just about creating an environment where others grow, but you also have to grow. And what that means is you have to realize that the workplace is not a place to feed your ego. So you can't pull rank until people listen to me because this is my title. No, that's really off the cards. And the next thing is in terms of corporate politics. Corporate politics is where people act in their own best interest to the detriment of the company's best interest. And a good culture, that also has no place. So really, in summary, I want to say that a resilient culture really creates three things. One, it produces engaged people as opposed to people who are disconnected with the business. They've checked out. Why? Because your productivity is going to be a lot better. People are going to be a lot more proactive. Next, you need to produce raving fans, and these raving fans are both internally in the business and externally. So this is going to make it much easier to get clients and actually attract great staff. And lastly, you need to actually grow people. And so just like plants can't really grow in a desert, people need the right environment in order for which they can grow as well. So a resilient culture creates great companies by encouraging everyone in the organization to grow. And great people don't just, come out of thin air. Great people are built, and they're built one at a time.
Thank you, Jake. Jared, if I can just ask you to bring all of our panelists back, because then we can have a discussion amongst all of us. So we're speaking about resilience. We're speaking about achieving, getting through difficult times. In fact, being born out of difficult times. Amanda, let's just start with you. Do you think that resilience can be taught? Do you worry, in fact, let me add to that question, do you worry that your children who are growing up, thankfully, in a very different environment to that which you grew up, do you think that they are doomed to be less resilient because of their circumstances?
I actually think you can teach resilience. I don't believe it's reserved only for the ones who've had a tough upbringing or a hardship. But I guess that just adds to your toolbox. But I don't necessarily believe it's the prerequisite for success. You can teach resilience. You can help your children as they go through their own journey and their own life. Understand, you will have hard times. You're not going to have everything the way you want. Hey, listen, you might want a really expensive pair of sneakers. I'm not going to buy that for you, because actually I'd rather save that money for vacation. Now, resilient on that. It's as basic as that, right? It's understanding that they can't just keep getting whatever they want because they want it. It's understanding that the world is what it is, and you're going to have to learn to find your space in it, no matter your hardships. I may have been able to give my children, and my husband and I may have been able to give them everything they need. We can't guarantee what's going to happen with their lives and their own paths. But what we can do is enable them to understand, but understand what your strengths are. define them, understand what it is that you're really great at, and understand that in the toughest of times, you're going to have to be calling upon that more often than not. Understand that you can be whoever you want to become, and that one little slip up along the way does not define your worth, does not define who you are. Allow yourself to make those mistakes. So resilience is not just about, you know, you've had a hardship, then automatically that's what we need in life. No, please, can we raise children who don't have to be going to psychologists all their life? You know, can we just raise children that don't have to recover from trauma?
Because do you find yourself sometimes shaking your head when your child is sobbing over something about not getting the latest sneakers, and you think back to the time that you at the age of 13 abused really in the most terrible circumstances, are going to find your mother in a shack in Johannesburg? It's almost unrelatable, and you've almost got to, I would imagine, stop yourself from saying, you know, you brat.
I do use that sometimes.
We all do. We understand.
No, I think my children have grown up with a great sense of responsibility and discipline, because we tell them these things. Money doesn't grow on trees. So you know, it's teaching them that we have a responsibility towards them, and us as parents are going to make what we believe are the best decisions for them. Of course, I look at them and I think, you know, I have to be self-aware, you know, I have to be conscious all the time, because it's easy to overcompensate for something you never had and end up pushing more the material path and wanting I want my children to be happy. I want them to be nurtured. I only ever care about their well-being. But people like me who have come from hardships, it's easy for us to go the complete opposite end and overcompensate. So even there, I've had to define my own blueprint of what it is to be a parent. Of course, I do it with my husband, because I'm not raising them alone, you know. Yeah.
Jake, I can see that
Yeah.
you've got something to add.
I was just thinking about, in terms of resilience with children, and it actually extends into adults. It's really about self-belief.
Yeah.
You know, if you can bring up your kids so that they know that they actually have they have a lot of confidence in themselves, they have self-belief that they can achieve amazing things, then they're not looking out to the outside world for somebody else who's going to actually do everything for them. They know, listen, I've got what it takes. I've got the tools. At worst, I can reach out and I can ask other people to assist me where needed, but it's really up to me. So if it's meant to be, it's up to me, and I can do it. And that's really what the self-belief's about. And I think as parents, if we can actually achieve that with our kids, we've set them up really well for the rest of their lives. And I think if you actually look at it from a business point of view, those employees that are the most treasured are those that actually take everything by the scruff of the neck and drive it forward. They're not looking around for everyone else to help them out. They're basically saying, this is the way I think we can do it, and they go ahead and do it. And I think it's that self-belief, it's that understanding that I can do it. I don't necessarily need other people. Yes, it's good to have other people, but I'm not dependent on other people. And it's being independent and actually ultimately being, in 2 words, being a grown-up. And that's really, I think, the essence of it.
And that's a very important point, Howard. Sorry to just step in there. You know, one of the things I'm very passionate about, and it's part of my work, is personal mastery. And you know, I have never, and I will never act like a victim in my life. Things happened to me. Horrible things happened. I didn't have control over that. But the moment I had control over myself was the day my life changed, was the day I became accountable for my own actions. So you can blame the world. You can blame whoever you want to blame. There's always somebody to blame. But only you are accountable for your life. And that's exactly what Jake is saying, that, you know, you are responsible for your life. You're responsible for your decisions. You have the confidence. Here you go. Go fly away and build up your life. But never, ever look to other people as excuses for why you don't do certain things. And own yourself, own your mistakes, and understand that no one owes you anything. And I think that's the one thing I have to ensure I constantly teach my children, because, you know, they are growing up way more privileged than even the average child. But it's understanding that that's my money, not yours. You still have to go and work for your own money.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Nastassia, your thoughts in looking at businesses. I mean, you've interviewed hundreds of businesses along your journey. Is this something that is an absolute theme throughout?
Totally. I mean, you know, when you look at whether resilience is taught, it comes back to that question that I used to always ask every, you know, CEO entrepreneur. Can you teach entrepreneurship? Like, are entrepreneurs born or made? And the best response I've gotten so far is that entrepreneurs are panel beaten.
Oh, that is that is so true. That it just that resonates.
It does, and you know, and I actually agree with it, because when I look at all these entrepreneurs and the environments that they, you know, came into when they decided to start their businesses, people thought that they were crazy. And you could just go back and do something else. Why would you want to go through these sleepless nights and possibly lose money and then invest 5 years or so into something that might not necessarily yield any results or fruit or whatever the case may be? And all of them decided, like, you know, despite the noise around me, I'm going to focus on what the goal is, and I'm going to do my best and see what happens. And I think the one thing that's always stood out when you look at all of them, and some have, you know, had their failures, and like every other person, nothing is perfect. We're all not perfect. We've made mistakes. It was about how quickly you pick up on those mistakes and then change the outlook or whatever you plan to do. I mean, if you look at the case with a company like Discovery, when they made, you know, an investment mistake in the US, they quickly picked up that this is not going to work out. Let's change, you know, course, as opposed to being stubborn about what you want to do and then throwing, you know, good money after bad. There are many other, you know, CEOs you can think of, the likes of Yanni Mouton, for instance. Everybody knows the story about how he partnered up with his friends and they ultimately fired him. And he could have gone into a little corner and then, you know, licked his wounds and decided, I'm not going to go back into business. But he subsequently made decisions that resulted in a company we currently know as PSG, which then made investments for companies we know as Capitec. So you have all these themes of resilience, or rather of tough economic situations or tough personal situations that you then decide to build up, I suppose, yes, we call it resilience, but thick skin, but it's also about the support system around you to help you to get there. Because, you know, I think if you are just for yourself, trying to lift yourself up and you don't have that environment, sometimes that can work against you. So you need those external voices that say, you need to look at this problem properly and decide what's working, what's not working, and make the tough decision if you want to get through. I think that's part of building that resilience as well.
Mm. Do you think, Amanda, maybe I'll ask you this question, do you think that South Africans have a national resilience? Is there such a thing?
I think we do, but we do at an individual level. South Africans are the most beautiful and at their best at an individual level. One-on-one, even the people at a collective who claim all sorts of big, bad words, actually are the same ones who are best friends with the same people they're calling out at a collective. So at an individual level, we've got the most amazing spirit, the most amazing connections with each other. We actually appreciate diversity. We appreciate where we've come from. We don't shy away from our history. We actually just look forward to having a future that is, you know, safe for our children, safe for us, and quite prosperous. But at a collective, we are deeply, deeply divided. And we don't have answers for that. But I think at a collective, we need to start building that muscle and understand that, you know, what we have at an individual level is what we can elevate to that collective level. Unfortunately, the collective level is rife with political agendas, with just noise, so that South Africa is seen or or it continues to be this a country that is unfortunately eating itself from the inside. So I really think we do have it. We have what it takes if we can elevate those individual connections to a collective level.
Yeah, so Amanda, I love what you're saying, and it resonates with me. And if you actually think back to Mandela, Mandela did at a national level. He said, "Listen, we're the Rainbow Nation," because what is he doing? He's creating a vision, and he was saying that's what we should aspire to, and that's actually how, collectively, we can actually become brilliant, because we have a why for the whole the whole country has a why, and we can get behind it. As soon as you start doing the victimhood, the reason we're so backward is because of this, or it's because of that. We're blaming that group. So it's the victimhood at a national level that keeps us back. And I think what's so inspiring about your story is you were saying, I didn't see myself as a victim, because ultimately that would have kept you back. And I think as a country, it keeps us back. And if we could only just reclaim the Rainbow Nation vision, I think it could be a way forward of actually trying to build to that next level and aspire to that next level.
Sorry to interrupt. I was going to say, just to add on to the points you guys are making, I think it's also about applying a level of factfulness when it comes to looking at various events happening, particularly in South Africa. And I'm not even going to talk about what's happening in the US or anywhere else. There seems to be this deluge of information that comes in fast all the time. And, I always say the media, we're sort of like a mirror, and what we basically put out in terms of information changes people's perspectives about how they see the world, whether they're far more pessimistic than they should be. And we only give, I think, a small picture of what's really, really going on. I mean, if you did a poll, if we had some time, and you did a poll and you asked people whether you thought inflation 10 years ago was higher than what it was now compared to 10 years ago, or whether people were, living in abject poverty many years ago versus now, people have this weird sort of distorted view that things are far worse now than they were back then. And I think it comes back to busting those myths that we have about the world and trying to get to, restore some level of perspective in terms of where we are, in terms of what's real and what's not.
Just Amanda, before you come back to your point, there is a poll that is taking place on the side. If you can just keep an eye on that and just answer the questions, it'll be very interesting to be able to collate some of that information. And if you have registered, which obviously you have, for this webinar, we'll send you those results. It's very interesting to get a sense of what people are feeling around this. Amanda, the point that you were going to make?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Jake is 100%. What we were given as South Africa is a great vision of a rainbow nation. And then there were gaps that we had to ourselves fill in and walk through to get to that vision. And I think that's where the messages have been lost in translation. Now, we talk about, a victimhood, but there's also entitlement that has also gone into these kinds of conversations, which is why I'm saying at a collective, it gets very complicated. However, I think the answers really lie in our individual connections, where around the table, we must be honest with each other. And I mean, in my book, Baked in Pain, a good friend of mine, Vessel Pretorius, who was in fact my coach when I was at the bank, he wrote my preface, and he says, I have known Amanda for multiple years. It was only through sitting down and listening to her story. It was through reading her book that I started to come out of my bubble as a male Afrikaner man who's grown up in South Africa with all this privilege, to suddenly see there existed a world outside of my world that I never even knew existed. And I think the magic lies in bursting those bubbles and starting to really understand where we've each come from and what the impact has been of where we've come from and how we can then move forward. But it is having these conversations with each other without the fear of judgment, without the fear of being, torn down. And that can only happen at an individual level, not at a collective level. But yeah, we've got a great vision, and we must just work towards it.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that part of the success was also the failure. In other words, this vision of this national vision of this rainbow nation, as wonderful as it was, is it actually kind of precluded us from having some of these very difficult conversations that we've always needed to have. And as a result of that, because we quickly moved on to this beautiful vision of what should be, we didn't really fix and really didn't have these, as you say, these difficult conversations with each other that actually dealt with some of the pain. And I believe that it's those fractures that continue to hurt us because they haven't wounded, they haven't healed properly, and they still remain there. It's through, as you say, these types of conversations where we hear a story that moves us, and it has to move us because we're human, and we hear what people went through that we didn't know or chose not to know, or whatever that reason was. And it's not about apportioning blame, it's just really understanding it from a very real perspective and feeling the pain that somebody else endured. And through that is how we can, as you say, get to heal from an individual basis upwards and not from a national basis downwards. And I think that's why this is so absolutely critical. We are almost out of time, unfortunately, and I knew that this was going to happen because this is a team that I think this is a crew that we can speak to for hours. I just want to quickly get.
They just started, Howard. We get
on for a few moments. If anyone does need to leave, they can. I just want to go to one or two questions. Good afternoon, Amanda. I completely relate to your story. I come from the Kalahari and took myself through school. In my journey, I have aspirations to have a financial advisory business with an emphasis on wealth creation. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge is getting the people who need financial assistance not seeing value in financial wealth and wellness. Do you have any advice how to overcome this challenge? I understand this is financial education. Isn't that a key to so much of this?
So, sorry, the question is, what advice does he want?
To somebody who's come through a similar kind of a situation, it would seem, and trying their best to be a financial advisory service, but finding it difficult to make people maybe understand the need for it.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe I'll make an example about me.
Oh, I'm not sure if it's only my side that's frozen. Okay, Amanda, I think yours is frozen. Tash, maybe Nastassia, do you want to maybe take?
Yeah, I think my first advice would be people relate to what applies to their circumstances, and I think it explains why a lot of financial institutions tend to miss a certain segment of the market. People have this misconception that financial advice, financial products are not designed for them. And some of them, when we're really honest, they're not. Because we're trying to create the solution for a market whose circumstances are very different. So people always say that, when you're trying to give me financial advice or trying to tell me to change my money habits, you're talking above me because my money habits are very different from the money habits of someone who is working in a corporate environment, who lives in Sandton, works in Rosebank, or whatever the case may be. And I think the first start would be try to understand your client or your potential client's circumstances. And once you've understood how they spend their money, how they, their basic lifestyle, you are then able to come back with information to them that they can apply at a tangible level. Because the moment you start telling somebody you need to budget, you need to do this, you need to do that, what is a budget to somebody whose monthly income is inconsistent and not sustainable, and they don't know when it's going to come, and they've got all kinds of things that they're dealing with? But help them start small and help them, understand that there are other products that are out there. And perhaps some people have this thing where they, don't trust banks or whatever the case is. But I think it's about trying to understand the person's circumstances and then applying what you're trying to do with them. So walk the journey with them, for lack of a better description.
And Jake, your advice to somebody who's an entrepreneur wanting to start out, it's not easy out there. People come from different environments. Some might have a little bit of support, but many people and many South Africans don't. Yeah,
so I think have a vision of what it is you're trying to achieve. And essentially, I mean, not everyone's cut out to be an entrepreneur. I think that's the first thing to realize. You've got to be a little bit nuts, actually, because the odds are against you. Chances are you're not going to succeed. So it needs to be something that you're really driven to do. It's something that you're called on to do because that's what you have to do. And for those people who have no choice, well, then maybe be an entrepreneur. Just know that it's going to be hard. You've got to just work flat out. You're going to work much harder than anybody else in a corporate job, for sure. You're going to work harder. And you've got to have a vision, and you've got to be able to motivate other people, inspire other people with the vision, explain, what it is you're trying to achieve, and constantly, believe in that you can achieve this. So it's actually not easy. I think there's a very small percentage of the population that have a personality profile that is well fitted to become an entrepreneur. But at the end of the day, if that's something that you need to do it, but then go in lock, stock, and barrel, like work as hard as you can.
Nastassia, one of the things that concern me is because so many people came from significantly compromised backgrounds, eventually maybe got a degree, land up working in a corporate, in a relatively safe environment, although we know that today there's probably no such thing. Doesn't the history that people have been through maybe prevent them from taking the risk to become an entrepreneur? It's much easier to be an entrepreneur if you've never really felt hunger or experienced hunger.
I think it's that, but I think it's also the incentive side. Like, we've got to ask ourselves, how much of the South African environment rewards entrepreneurs? Do we have an ecosystem where if you're an entrepreneur looking for capital, you're able to get a hold of it, whereas in the US, it's probably fairly easier to get it. In South Africa, we're too busy doing all kinds of things. When you look at the corporate environment and you look at how much people earn, you then wonder, will I be able to make the kind of money, or at least come close to having a decent lifestyle while I'm trying to build this business? And then you think about the red tape and the barriers to entry and all kinds of things that you need to do. And then you weigh up, well, I might as well help build someone else's business instead of trying to build my own. And there's the fear of failure and how we view failure as South Africans, and whether somebody will fail 5 times and then come back for the 6th time after having lost their money, gone bankrupt, sold their house, moved in with their parents, and have all kinds of things happening to them. But the other side that we also need to think about is that if you talk to all the entrepreneurs over the years, some of them will tell you that they started their business when they were in their 40s or 50s, after having worked in corporate and understood how that corporate environment works. The problem with South Africa is that we've got a high youth unemployment rate, which means that we're not going to have young people going into the corporate, building that level of, foundation, building the context and the network in order for you to have the big leap of faith to go into entrepreneurship. So I think we're fighting too much, but it can be done. It's not impossible. We just need to have a whole new conversation about what we think matters to us as South Africans.
Amanda, the questioner, welcome back. We lost you for a few minutes. The question that I posed was a concern that I generally have is because of the experience and the difficulty with which many South Africans have been through in order to acquire an education, get a job at a corporate. Does that prevent them from taking risks? They're now in a relatively safe environment. Maybe they're helping family. It's the first time that generation now is making a reasonable amount of money. It's a massive risk, perhaps more than somebody that's come out of, I hate to use the word privilege, but who's come out of a privileged environment. It's much harder to be an entrepreneur under those circumstances.
No, absolutely. And without a shadow of doubt, it's we've got black tax, and you can't run away from it. And would you rather, pursue something as in the statute earlier that could or couldn't work, possibly won't work for a long time, or make sure that you put food on your on your family's table, make sure that you can buy medication for your grandma, you name it. So, but I think we need to tell more and more of the success stories as well around entrepreneurship, because it does tend to be a very negative conversation. And I mean, a lot of us can think of the time you said you wanted to run a business and your family was like, what does that mean? They only expect you to have a profession, you know. And I think, I mean, these are the conversations I have with my kids. My kids are I don't know how, great artists, all three. Well, I know how. I'm creative. My husband claims the same. But you know, it's encouraging them. They've been selling their art on Instagram. They've made a lot of money. They can pay for their own next vacation. So it's letting them taste that side of entrepreneurship where they can actually earn money from their own creation, from their own creativity, and build that muscle, and that it's actually okay to try. It's okay to risk it. And you know, and Nastassia said, somebody said that entrepreneurs are plumbers. I say we are risk. We don't take risks. We are risk. We are risk to everyone around us. But when it succeeds, then everybody succeeds. We get to create jobs, and we will go through the hardship. I mean, I've lost a lot of money in business before, lots of money, in fact, before I actually tasted the big time, the success. But it still doesn't guarantee that my next venture or whatever I invest in is going to succeed either. But you just keep having that faith, and you get better at it. The more you do it, the better you get at it. The more you are able to pick out the right opportunities that you can also pursue. So yeah, absolutely. I think responsibility does tend to pull people back, and they can't be irresponsible with their families. So it's fully understandable. But we must encourage the younger people coming. So the one thing I always tell my children is that don't worry about buying a house or a car, right? When you start making money, don't worry about that. What you should worry about is what business are you going to invest in with your money, and where's the next country you are going to explore? Because I want them to have an expanded view of the world, something that I never had as an opportunity. I'm only going to do now. Yeah.
All right, so we do need to wrap up in just a moment. But what I want to know from Jake, let's start with you. What would you consider the most important aspects of resilience?
Yeah, so it's what I talked about, is really tapping in to the human spirit. I think if you can engage human beings at an emotional level, at a level where they really buy into a vision, they're with you, you're speaking to them, they know they're valued, they know they can contribute. I think people are amazing, and people can actually, you know, we can work together phenomenally well, and we can, and that's if we're engaged. If we've checked out, we can't. And it's really about speaking to that human spirit in all of us. And if we can engage that, everything becomes resilient. The person becomes resilient, but the companies that they work within become resilient as well.
Nastassia?
I would say is know your why. Know why you're doing something. And I'm a firm believer of intention governs outcome. So if you're clear about the intention from the get-go, that already tells you what the outcome is going to be at the end. But if you're a bit fuzzy about it, when things are getting tough and you're being knocked on every side and people don't like what you're putting forward as a product or a service, and you don't like the critical feedback that you're getting, you're going to basically fall apart because you didn't understand what your why was and why you started in the first place. So I think that is an aspect of resilience that you need to start working on.
Absolutely. Amanda, I'll leave you with the last word.
Thank you. And so listen, to me, resilience is really that ability to recover quickly from disappointments or you know, mistakes, and learning from them. But understanding that your life is not just one thing. You know, you're not just a successful person. No, you also have your disappointments. Understanding that you're not always feeling positive. You'll have those days when you don't feel great. And you must take yourself as a whole human being, as a whole being, and work on those things that you need to work on. But have a very clear vision of what your life should be and what it ought to be. And do everything you can to only focus on the things that enable that vision. So don't go around wasting your energy on things that are not going to yield success. But even that that takes time, and whatever your success is, that takes time, and you learn along the way, you know, what the tools and the tricks are of that particular trade. But you can never give up because you're going through a dark season. We see it, seasons change all the time. So you must just hang on to the fact that if you are on the right track and are doing the right things that are going to enable your vision, and learn from the things that you do that disable your vision, and move forward, you know, never stop because you've had a disappointing time.
Absolutely wonderful. I'm Howard Feldman. This is the Synthesis AWS webinar. We've been talking about resilience. Amanda, Nastassia, and Jake Shepherd. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. Thank you for everybody who joined us. Thanks for all of your questions. Please make sure to follow us on social media, and make sure to so that you can hear about our next webinars. It's been absolutely fantastic. I've loved it. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Be well, be safe, and be successful. Thank you.